So what are we up to now? So we've set up remote access SSH, and we've created a project, pulled a server. Now we have to create the branches, right? So let's go back to the commands. And another thing that I should have showed you, but I'll show you later on as well, is Git Diff, right? So Git Diff, actually, what you can do is you can go Git Diff and figure out the changes. So what Git Diff is it shows you the differences between different versions of commits. So you can, for example, Git status, it's up to date. So if you go Git log, now we have two commits. We have created a new counter project initial commit. So what you can do is, and the identifiers for each commit is usually in like hexadecimal, or this huge as identifier. If you go Git Diff, and then, because this is the most current version, if you want to see the difference between the initial commit, then and then see how the green shows you the differences between the versions, and then so the green with the pluses shows you the additional lines of code that you added. And then if you like deleted some files, then it would be red and it would be minus instead of the plus. So it would show you what files, and this is just the React.js dependencies and all that, right? So let's just I'm just going to clear this to make it clean. So now what we want to do is create branches. So at the moment, if we go Git branch master, so we're on master, right? If we go Git branch -r, I think that's what it is. Yeah. So see how here it's green and it says master, and then here it says origin head, origin master, right? So this is the branches on the remote repository, and this is your repository, right? So in this case, the origin head is pointing to origin master, which means the commit version that is on the current commit that is currently being selected, right, is origin master. But sometimes what you can have is the origin master is a couple of commits ahead, and then your origin head is actually a couple commits behind, and that's when somebody might have just checked out a previous commit and is working on that instead of the master, right? But you'll see that later down the track. Now, what I'll do is, remember how in okay. Remember how we have the different tasks, right? Now we can actually create the branches. And before we make these feature branches, we have to sort of set up we're going to have to set up the actual Git Flow. So where's that diagram? Yeah, so we're going to have to set this up, right? So we've got master. Now So we'll make a development branch, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so if you go git branch, see now there's development, an extra branch, but you're still checked out in master. And if you go git branch -r, it doesn't exist on the remote repository because you still have to push that branch. Now, you can do it this way, or there's a way on the actual repo. You could actually create the types of branches and yeah, so I'd probably recommend to create the branch on the actual Bitbucket first, so it's set up correctly. So for example, you make development. Right, so now you have two branches, and then from development, we can create feature branches, right? So yeah, at the moment there's master development. Now what we can do, so from development, we want to create these feature branches, right? Yeah, so because I've already created the development branch on the local, and then I did git pull, now it references the branches. Yeah. So if we go git check out development. So at the moment, I'm currently on master, but then if I go git checkout development, it switched to development. So if we look at the files, it's still the same thing. But let's say in development, I were to change. So at the moment, the test.txt doesn't have any content in it. But let's say if we edit it with Vim, and then, right, we are on, right. And then I save the file. So we now have, we are on development branch, and git status. We modified that, git commit. Oh, sorry, git add. Git commit. Git status, and then git push. So this is what I want to talk about. Because this is the first time you're using the branch, right? You can't directly push straight away because the new branch isn't tracked by the remote. So if you want to track the upstream of the remote repository, and you want to sort of keep it in line with your local repository, you'd have to run this. So you'd have to run this command. There's a different variation, like there's an older style of doing it, but you'd probably best to just run what it says. Sets. So let's see what it does. It's gonna push the latest code, and then now say look at this. It says to bitbucket.org better bytes pty ltd tutorial.git. Now it says branch development set up to track remote branch development. So it's now in line. It's now in sync with the origin. So if we go git status, right, or git log, I should say, see how, so you've got head. See how head is now on development. So setting up development branch, and then the origin development, which is here. So let's look at here, right? So let's refresh this, and then let's go back. Yeah, so let's look at this. So 2 minutes ago, right, we are on the development branch. So see how it saved the change, right? And if we go back to the master, right, let's go back to master, and if we look at the test.txt, there's nothing on there. And that's because we pushed our changes to development, but we didn't push it to master, which I'll show you how that's going to be done later down the track once we actually make the changes to the actual React application. So development, we made our changes. Now what I want to do from development is create branches from there, because you don't want to directly work on development because you might have multiple people working on development. So from there, you would need to create another branch, right? So create branch, let's say feature. Oops. So I'll just show you something. Feature branch naming conventions. So there's different ways you can name the feature branches, but usually there's a convention that people use. So see how you can go feature, say, oh yeah, there you go. So another reason why you want to create it on Bitbucket or whatever, whatever you're using. So if you're using GitLab or GitHub, then you want to create it there because you can automatically create, the branch name. So if you do feature / you can call that feature whatever you're using. So in this case, we're using say BBDT-7. So BBDT-7. But the reason why I'm saying this is because if you ended up making this branch on console, then you could misspell it, and then you could have issues with the name conventions and all that. So what I would do is, with the issue tracker, you could have the long name, so add extra counters or something like that. But the thing is, because you're using an issue tracker anyway, you can just leave it as BBDT-7 because you can probably reference it within your issue tracker anyway. So you go, and the thing is, this see this diagram, it's saying that it's merging, or it's taking the version of the code from master. So the thing is, you don't want to directly work off of master, because remember how That's the issue with a lot of tabs. Yeah, here you go. So you know how here, so you've got master and then you've got development, but then the feature branches aren't working directly on from master. They're working straight from development, right? So what you need to do is you need to change it and you need to say, oh, we want to work from development, right? And then create that, right? So now you have another branch. Now, what we need to do is go back to the other ones and prepare the other branches. So, yeah. So now we've got BBDT-7. That's add extra counters. Now let's go change colors of counters. So create a new branch. Let's feature branch from development and see how now you have the extra feature, right? You can make, another branch of another branch of another branch. So you can play around with it and have limitless amounts of branches of other branches off of other branches. But in terms of organization's sake, then you want to limit the amount of branches that you have. So from development, and then this would be change. Oh, sorry. BBDT-8, right? So create that, yes. And then let's make another one. Now, when it's asking about checkout in SourceTree. SourceTree is a application that you can set up on your desktop to, give you a visual layout of your repository. There is a way to, so if you go to say commits, that does show you sort of a graphical. If you go say, at the moment it doesn't really show you, how they're connected, but eventually when you have more commits, you'll see a graphic on the side, or maybe it's on in a different option. But yeah, you usually see how the branches connect and how the commit nodes are represented. So you would see something. You would see something like this, like a diagram like this, and how the branches are connected. But at the moment, it's not really important. So BBDT-7, BBDT-8, and then let's make another branch. BBDT-9. Feature, then development. Yep. Okay. Okay, so we go back branches, and we've got our 3 features from development. So let's go back here, and then if you go git status, right, or git log, you don't have the other branches. So if you go git branch, you only have 2, and now we're checked out in development. But if you go git branch -r, notice how here it just says development master, but you don't see the other branches. That's because your local repository keeps a reference of what is on the actual, the actual remote repository, right? But the thing is, if you don't pull, or if you don't fetch the latest information from the remote repository, then you're not going to have any up-to-date information about what the extra things that just happened. So the extra things that just happened was that we created these extra branches, right? But it's not actually showing. So we're like, oh, how come there's no extra branches? So the way there's two ways of updating your local repository. One way is to pull, which will fetch the remote the metadata and all that about the remote repository, and it'll also pull the actual up-to-date files and data in the actual branch that you've checked out, right? Now, if you don't want to do that, because sometimes you're currently working on code, and once you pull the code from the remote repository, that will populate what you're working on. So it might interfere with what you have already set up, right? So if you just want to, get details about, what branches are there remotely, then what you can do is just go git fetch. Git fetch, right? So git fetch will just get the information. So see how it says new branch, new branch, new branch, and then now if you go git branch, but the thing is, it won't pull any new code from the from the remote repository. So you don't have to worry about your code being interfered with. So if you go git branch R, right? So now you have a reference of the remote branches. Yeah, so you have the references of the remote branches now, because now you actually fetched the metadata of the remote repository. Now, so let's go into let's go git checkout feature. So now what we want to do is we want to work on, so before we start working on these features, what would usually happen is, so as you're doing the requirements solicitation and analysis and all that, and then you create your, you do your planning, and then you plan out your sprints, and then you usually have, a backlog list of tasks throughout the whole project. And then from that backlog, you would sort of break that down to, a sprint backlog. And so if, for example, here, let's say I create sprint 1 and then add this one, say sprint 1, let's say I put 2 in one sprint, and then create another sprint 2, and then, put that for sprint 2, right? So that means with the feature branches that I made, right, the BBDT9 would be sprint 2, but then the BBDT7 and the BBDT8 will be sprint 1, right? And let's say, so we haven't assigned it to anyone, but we'll just, assign it to a team member, and then assign it to team member. And then, so, and then let's start the sprint, right? So start date is today, and then end date. So that is 2 weeks from now. So by default, it sets it for 2 weeks from now. But you can change the length of a sprint, or increase, decrease, and we'll just say add extra counters and change colors. So maybe let's do it in 1 week, because we'll probably finish it. So start, and now, so we don't have to do, like say if there's 2 team members that are working on the task, you can assign this to another. Say, I'll assign this to you, Earl. Yeah. But
yeah.
So what we can do is, I'll say add extra counters, right? So in progress. So that tells everyone that I'm actually working on it. And while that's, in progress, I go, so check out and then I just have to select number 7. Yeah, so it says branch feature BBDT 7 set to track remotes. Yeah. Okay, so now, so it's up to date. Let's look at that project again. So see how, remember I was talking about the readme.md? When people are making their applications, right? They need to write down the commands to run so that you can, test your code, you can run your code, you can, build your code, and so on and so forth, right? So in this case, I'll have to go into counter, cd counter.app, right? And then, so the thing is, this, when you go http /localhost, right? That's assuming if the code is on your local device. But remember, we have this running on a remote server, right? So if we go npm install, that will, okay, so npm is not found, right? So what we need to do is we actually need to install node. So that's another thing as well. Yeah. So because I'm in root, then I don't have to go sudo, right? So I just have to go app install npm. Yeah, so app install npm. So that should, and then just press yes. So that will install the packages, libraries, and all that. It'll install node and npm. Usually to make sure that it's all up to date, you'd probably run these commands apt-get update, apt-get upgrade, so that will update the repository, the library repository for node to be installed from. So if it's not up to date, then it might be installing an older version of node. Yeah, so we'll just have to wait until it finishes installing. So how are you finding it so far? Is it it seems a bit like complex and overwhelming, but
yeah, but I think it might help when we start handling projects, because it might be, this can be efficient for us.
Yeah. So the thing is, when you're working in groups, it's like, at first it is difficult to set up the environment and the version controls and the working together in a team with the tools. But once you get sort of the hang of it, it's sort of like playing basketball, right? When you play basketball, you have a team. First, you only get used to playing by yourself and shooting the hoop and all that kind of stuff. But then eventually you're going to have to get used to, playing a specific role within the team, and then how to pass the ball to another team member, and so on and so forth. Yeah. So.
Yeah.
Oh. So apparently it didn't. Maybe let's try this. Okay, so if that didn't install, maybe. maybe this is where you have to go. Oh, that's another thing as well. Depending on the version of Ubuntu that you have, sometimes the commands that you actually have to run to install certain tools, libraries, so on and so forth is different. So that's probably why when you're following a specific tutorial, and then the software doesn't actually say properly, then yeah, that's probably because of the version of the operating system. Yeah.
Okay. So like, do we really need to use like Linux terminal for this?
Well, so there's a reason. So there's a big reason why you'd use the Linux terminal, because you're hosting the server, the droplet server from DigitalOcean, right? Linux usually comes in two flavors. They usually come in the desktop version and the server version. And the server version is usually console based, but the desktop version usually has a GUI. Now, the reason why the server version is usually console based is because it's lightweight and you can easily access it remotely on using a, just SSHing using a console, right? And it doesn't lag that much. If you end up remote accessing your server and you enable the GUI, the user interface, then it's going to be really slow because you're trying to work remotely, and it's constantly streaming the the screen to your local device, and that's why it's really ineffective if you're gonna. So the thing is, if you want something with the best of both worlds, where you want the user interface, but at the same time you're working remotely and you don't want it to lag, then what you could do is set up an environment on your local device, right? And set up your, say, IDE, your Visual Studio Code, right? Or Sublime, or Notepad++, or whatever you use. Set that up, but also set up a plugin or a library that allows you to remotely connect to your server and access your files, and then that way you can load your files remotely onto your IDE on your local device. So you can still use, and that's what I was going to show you before. That's the reason why I have, or actually not before, but I mean that's what I'd eventually show you. So I have Visual Studio Code open, and there's a tutorial on how to connect, so remote development over SSH. So when we start programming, you're not going to change and update the code through the command line, because that's just going to be very tedious, because even with using Vim, it doesn't have the proper syntax highlights, and also the error checks and all that. You can't have error checks on, like, yeah, it's hard to have, the error checks on actual console. So it's better to have the syntax checker on your actual IDE on your local device. Yeah, but I'll show you how that works. So yeah, so now that's up to date. Let's go back to, hold on, did I just? Yeah, so I guess the instructions was, so apt install. Yeah. So now we go node. Yep, so now it's version 10.19.0. Now let's do that again. So now we know that node is installed. So now we have to set up the application, and we write down npm install. So let's just see what npm install does first. So it would execute the package.json. So if you look at the contents of package.json, it has in the JSON, in JSON format, it has scripts, and then it has start, build, test, eject, right? So yeah, so if when you run npm install, what will happen is it will install these libraries. And remember how I was talking about how with the git ignore, you ignore the node modules. In the node modules folder, these are the libraries that will actually be installed. So because they're already publicly available, you don't have to keep a reference or a copy of them on your repository. All you need to do is install it, and then it's going to pull the libraries in. So let's just do that. So npm install. Right. Oh, in this case, yeah, see how before, right? I did. So it's actually using, yeah, it's actually, so apt install, oops, apt install np. Yeah, so I also had to install npm. Now, this is just doing it directly on the server, but sometimes you might want different versions of Node, or sometimes you might not want to install it at all, and you're working on the same server, right? So if you have like different applications, right, then what you could do is create Docker containers to encapsulate and modularize your system. So if you have a container, then you can have an environment for Node.js in that container, right? And then if you have another container, you can have, say, WordPress instance, or Laravel, or a different type of application, or a different type of stack. So for example, if the software that you're using needs, say, you need a different OS, right? You need CentOS, and you're using your droplet is Ubuntu, right? Then you can create a Docker container that has CentOS OS and run that specific application within that Docker container. So it can still run within your general server, but it's within another container within your server. Yeah. But yeah, that's later down the track. That's even more advanced when you start working with containers, because you can work with repositories within containers. You can get you can link releases of your Git repository to those containers, and then essentially it's like whenever you might have a live server that has a container that's connected to your release, and then while your developers are working on a development server, and then they push the code to the development branch, right? And then the senior developers, they verify the code's working, they test it and all that, and they send it to the test servers, and then it automatically gets deployed to the live server. And that's how essentially what they do is they create a CI/CD pipeline where people are committing code on the development side, and then they're pushing the code, and then you have build servers that automatically test the code and integrate the code, and then once it passes all the tests, then it pushes it directly to the live server. It pushes it and deploys it and builds it, and then it builds it and then deploys it, and then it deploys it onto the live server, and then it seamlessly updates the system on the client end. So the client themselves, they don't see any difference, right? And they don't see any downtime, but it's continuously updated as developers continue to work on things. Yeah. So what did that do? So what did the npm install do? So what it did was it created a we haven't even been up to that point yet. So we've set up we installed npm. So npm version. So now it's 6.14.4, and then if you go npm install, so now you're installing the actual project, and it's installing all the dependencies. Yeah, so now that's finished. And then, so before we just had public source, and now we have node modules, right? And also the package lock. So the difference between package.json and package lock is that so when you're installing the libraries for the project, sometimes those libraries have their own dependencies as well. So all of those are the dependencies of so libraries have dependencies on other libraries, which have dependencies on other libraries, and so on and so forth. So you can really have a nested dependency list, right? Now, next thing is you go npm start, right? So we go npm start. It's currently running, right? But now see how, so it's running. See how here, if you want to open it, you would go localhost 3000. But the thing is, remember, we're running it from DigitalOcean. So what's the public IP of DigitalOcean? It's 139.59, so on and so forth, right? So let's copy that. So here it says localhost, and I'm assuming this probably won't work because the ports are probably blocked on the outside, right? So if I did that, oh, so there you go, it works. Yeah, so I'm accessing the app, right? So see, here it says HTTP localhost port 3000, but here I'm using 139.59.109.39, 3000. And yeah, that's working. But if I go Control C, now it's no longer running. So because this is React is basically a front end framework, it's still functioning, right? Right. But if I refresh it, yeah, now I can't access it because the server's not running. So if I go start again, yeah, then let's refresh this.
Yeah.
And also another thing is there's plugins that you can use that automatically say restart the server once you make changes. So for example, when you make changes on this, right, in code, then it updates automatically, right? On when you're running it in the actual, the browser, right? So now what we want to do is, so if we navigate into the source code, and then we look at the app.js, yeah, so there's counters, right? And then essentially if I were to create another counter, I would just add in another line, right? Now I'm not going to want to edit this on the console because it's going to be tedious, right? So that's where I was talking to you about before, is where I set this up for remote access, right? So that's where this comes in, right? So we now just need to look for, cancel. We now just need to look for the plugin. So remote h